Gazans bury 41 unidentified bodies returned by Israel as searches continue for thousands missing. Sudan's army chief says his forces withdrew from Al-Fasher after the RSF took control. And Egypt's President al-Sisi highlights Egypt's role in regional stability and support for millions fleeing conflicts.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful, and very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate. And you are a great leader. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great president. And I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome to the first news bulletin of the day. We start with Gazans holding burials for 41 unidentified bodies returned by Israel under the ceasefire agreement as civil defense appealed for heavy machinery and supplies to recover thousands still missing beneath the rubble. Funerals took place in Gaza for 41 unidentified bodies repatriated under the ceasefire framework, with shrouded remains interred while authorities work to verify identities. The Gaza civil defense official urged international and humanitarian rights organizations to provide heavy equipment, fuel, and forensic supplies to accelerate the recovery and identification, saying the number of missing has surpassed 10,000. Local teams say limited access, damaged roads, and persistent hazards are slowing retrieval efforts across multiple districts. Officials added that further transfers are expected, with DNA testing planned to match remains to families as cemeteries expand capacity for burials. Egypt has dispatched its 60th aid convoy under the Zerdadeza Provision of Honor from Egypt to Gaza initiative from Rafah to Gaza via the Karim Abu Sadim border crossing. The aid convoy carries 9,800 tons of aid, including around 6,500 tons of food, supplies and flour, more than 2,200 tons of medical and relief supplies, and over 1,000 tons of fuel. Since its launch on July 27th, the initiative had transported thousands of tons of food, flour, baby formula, medical supplies, medicine, personal care items, and fuel to the besieged territory. At the Paris Peace Forum, organizers say the goal is lasting peace with a focus on Gaza, yet Director General Justin Weiss has said such peace cannot be achieved as long as Netanyahu is in power. The Paris Peace Forum convened diplomats and civil society to push de-escalation and humanitarian access, framing Gaza as a test of whether dialogue can translate into enforceable commitments. Forum Chief Justin Weiss said that the initiative aims to align relief, reconstruction planning and political guarantees, but argued that meaningful progress is unlikely while Israel's current leadership remains, a stance likely to draw strong reactions. Sessions highlighted ceasefire compliance, detainee exchange, and safeguards for aid corridors alongside calls for wider regional engagement. Organizers positioned the forum as a venue to bridge the official talks and grassroots initiatives while pressing for verifiable steps that reduce violence on the ground.
Des minéraux de transition, de l'IA, de la tech, de la cybersécurité. Et on a ajouté toute une partie plus géopolitique sur le conflit israélo-palestinien.
Search teams used heavy machinery in Qnews to look for the remains of Israeli detainees. As Israel confirmed, the Red Cross transferred another body the day before. Israel has said that the Red Cross handed over the body of another deceased detainee from Gaza to the Israeli military. If identified, officials say the number of detainees whose remains are still in Gaza would stand at 12. Earlier, Hamas armed wing said it would transfer a body it recovered in Gaza. Recovery and handover of remains have complicated President Donald Trump's Gaza plan, with Hamas citing rubble and access limits that hinder the search, while an Israeli spokesperson said the group knows the locations. Crowds gathered at the scene in the occupied West Bank where Israeli forces killed 3 Palestinians near Jenin. Israeli police and the occupation military said the men were reportedly planning attacks and were later hit from the air. Israeli police said forces opened fire on 3 suspected gunmen in the Jenin area and then struck from the air, alleging the men were preparing imminent attacks. Footage from the site showed firefighters dousing a burning vehicle as smoke billowed over the road. There was no immediate comment from the Palestinian officials, and the claims could not be independently verified. The incident comes against the backdrop of a large Israeli operation launched in January in the Jenin refugee camp. A long stronghold for armed resistance left swaths damaged and residents displaced. Security patrols remained in the area as investigators examined the strike location. Palestinian farmers and foreign activists fled tear gas in Qnews, north of Ramallah, amid the presence of Israeli forces and settlers. The village's mayor says settlers' pressure is preventing olive harvesting, happening even inside areas under Palestinian authorities' control. Video from Qnews showed farmers and international volunteers scrambling from tear gas as Israeli forces and settlers were seen in the area during the olive harvest. Mayor Lafi Shadabi said daily settler incidents are disrupting work across zones administered by the Palestinian Authority, including Area B, and at times even parts of Area A, where residents report being blocked from accessing groves. Local committees say the season is already short on manpower and security escorts, heightening risk of pickers. Israeli authorities have previously said security operations target threats, while Palestinians view on-the-ground friction as systemic pressure during harvest weeks. Medical teams treated tear gas exposure as villagers dispersed. Israel's hardline National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today to destroy Hamas entirely. Ben-Gvir accused Hamas of stalling by not promptly returning detainee remains and warned the time has come to break these legs for good, according to him. His comments increased pressure on Netanyahu for a tougher military response. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's office said another set of remains arrived via the Red Cross. In that context, Hamas has said it returned the remains of 17 out of 28 dead and 20 living detainees. Israel confirmed 16 bodies. For more analysis, we now move to Hedda Hamalawi in our newsroom. To you, Hedda.
Thank you so much, Rihim. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Al-Ahram Managing Editor, Mr. Muhammad Izzuddin. Welcome to Q News. Mr. Izzuddin, what diplomatic mechanism can insulate the ceasefire from disputes over unidentified remains, and which neutral body or institution should lead verification to keep talks on track?
Of course, Israel is trying to make up obstacles to start phase 2 and start the reconstruction, and this comes even though the Palestinian resistance don't have much to do with, and the international calls and requests to provide more devices, bulldozers, and so on. And the occupation forces have only agreed to deliver a few, and these will be nowhere near enough. And with the Egyptian pressure as a main mediator in the peace process, they have called for more bulldozers to be delivered, and also the international community, other countries from around the world, those who were in the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. But the occupation forces are still stalling and are trying to push phase 2 as far as possible, and to keep things as is for now under the control of the Israeli occupation forces, and also pushing the domestic borders of the strip and taking up more land under the yellow line with the occupied Gaza Strip. And it is also aiming to have the reconstruction process far away from the observation of the international community or the committee that will be formed soon, so that they can keep things as is, in addition to having reconstruction under the control of Israel. And this is not acceptable, and we need the US to interfere here and to show things for how they really are. Israel is using pretexts, and the far-right government leaders, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, are pressuring or are putting so much pressure on them, and have statements that say that Hamas needs to be ended and eradicated, and the detainees needs to be handed over, even though Israel itself is the one stalling the detainee release because of preventing everything that they need to remove the rubble to enter.
And sir, how do statements from the Paris Peace Forum questioning prospects under Israel's current leadership affect mediation space and incentives for compromise among all the parties?
A field operation now that is trying to hinder any efforts or have a climate full of tension and negativity, so that they cannot go on with the upcoming phases. The far right leader statements, in addition to calling to keep the war going and reignite it again, if Hamas does not give back the rest of the detainees, even though the Palestinian resistance is doing everything that they can when it comes to this, in addition to some attempts to hinder the international efforts and delivering the basic things that they need, tents and covers and so on, that can enter through the Rafah crossing and Karim Abu Salam, and they are also hindering the delivery in general, and they are trying to lessen the amount that enters. And so there are so much attempts and so much pressure from the far right leaders on Netanyahu, and it shows that Netanyahu is leaning into this pressure, and he wants things to stay as is, so that the government and the president are the main focus now, even though there is there are calls to start early elections in Israel in the upcoming phase, and so much pressure from the parties in the occupation country.
Sir, what coordinated steps by Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the United States and the European partners could unlock timely transfers in the detainee remains file while reinforcing compliance with the ceasefire?
There is so much effort from the mediators. Of course, Egypt with Qatar and Turkey, they are aiming to really help here to locate the detainee bodies, the remaining ones, even though they don't really have the necessary equipment. And also there are calls from the international entities to help with this, but there are obstacles and barriers that are imposed by the occupation forces to start a broader operations to locate the remaining of the detainees' bodies and the Gaza Strip. And of course, Egypt is putting so much effort and has a crucial role and has pressured Israel so much to deliver some heavy equipment, and they also have staff to help locate these bodies and remaining, and they are also ready to deliver even more equipment in addition to deliver generic aid, and also some aid like tents, covers, and basic necessities. But Israel is blocking the delivery of this aid that can help them locate their detainees, and they also are justifying their actions because they didn't receive their detainees and then hindering the peace agreement in Gaza.
Well, that was Mr. Mohammed Izzeddin, Al-Ahram Managing Editor, joining us from Cairo. Thank you so much for being with us here on Q News. Now we go back again to Riham Morsi in our studio. To you, Riham.
Thank you, Heather, for that interview. And we move on to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that appeared in court to testify in his ongoing corruption trial, which began in 2020. He has pleaded not guilty in 3 cases, including accepting gifts worth about 700,000 shekels. Netanyahu's testimony resumes as a long-running case, punctuated by 2 years of war and regional upheaval. Prosecutors say he received benefits from businessmen and sought favorable media coverage in separate files. The defense argues the gifts were tokens among friends and not a quid pro quo occurring. There is no ruling yet, and proceedings could extend as the court hears further witnesses and examines documentary evidence. The Prime Minister maintains his innocence and says the charges are politically motivated. The case continues under tight security and intense media scrutiny, with next sessions expected to focus on corroborating testimony. And now we move on to the latest developments in Sudan. Sudan's Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has confirmed that his forces have withdrawn from al-Fashir after the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, seized control of the city. Al-Burhan said the leadership decided to leave al-Fashir due to the city's systemic destruction. He vowed that all criminals targeting the Sudanese people will be held accountable, stressing that the armed forces remains fully capable of defeating those who kill innocent Sudanese. UN Chief Antonio Guterres called the suffering and famine-stricken al-Fashir unbearable, warning that growing external interferences is undermining the ceasefire after Sudan's Rapid Support Forces claimed full control of the city. Speaking on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, Guterres said the humanitarian toll in al-Fashir has become intolerable and urged immediate protection of civilians and unobstructed aid access. His remarks followed an RSF claim to have seized the North Darfur capital, a strategic hub whose fall would deepen displacement and famine risks across Darfur. The Secretary General cautioned that more and more external interference is hardening positions and shrinking space for a ceasefire. He pressed all parties and their backers to halt attacks, respect international humanitarian law, and return to mediated talks as agencies assess access corridors and scale up plans for food, medical supplies, and evacuations.
Play whatever role the key actors involved in this process will determine.
The African Union has condemned the atrocities and alleged war crimes committed in Al-Fashir, expressing grave concerns over the situation in Sudan. The chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mahmoud Ali Youssef, strongly condemned the grave violations of human rights and international law, including war crimes and ethnically targeting killings of civilians. He reminded all parties of the obligations to protect civilians and warned their perpetrators would be held accountable. The AU chairperson called for an immediate ceasefire and the opening of humanitarian corridors to deliver life-saving aid to affected communities. UNICEF has warned that the violence in Al-Fashir poses extreme danger to 130,000 trapped children. It called for an immediate ceasefire and safe humanitarian access to all affected civilians, stressing that those responsible for violations must face justice without exception. The Kremlin has said that Russia cannot assess peace talks with Ukraine because Kyiv has put them on hold, while alleging foreign fighters are present in the front line and vowing they will be destroyed. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters in Moscow is unable to gauge the state of negotiations as Ukraine is not responding to questions Russia has posed. He also claimed Russian troops constantly hear foreign languages, citing English and French, among those fighting for Ukraine, and warned such fighters would be targeted. Moscow has long alleged a NATO presence in Ukraine that the alliance is in support of Kyiv, but has not deployed soldiers. Western media reports intelligence personnel are active. The assertions could not be independently verified. Kyiv has not immediately commented on the status of talks or Russia's claim about foreign combatants. The Kremlin said it has heard President Donald Trump's calls for countries to stop buying Russian oil, but that Moscow's partners will decide for themselves whether to keep purchasing Russian energy, citing market and price considerations. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that while Washington is pressing states to curb Russian oil purchases, buyers will ultimately weigh their own interests, including securing high-quality energy at competitive prices. He framed the issue as a market decision for Russia's partners rather than a political one, even as U.S. efforts intensify to squeeze Moscow's revenues. The remarks underscore a broader tug-of-war over global energy flows, with sanctions, price caps, and alternative supply routes shaping demand. Moscow maintains that long-term contracts and discounted crude continue to anchor sales, while Western governments push importers to reduce exposure. North Korea's Foreign Minister Chow Son-hui met President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin to discuss deeper cooperation, according to KCNA, as concerns grow over Moscow-Pyongyang military ties. KCNA reported Chow Son-hui's Kremlin talks with Vladimir Putin focused on many future projects to strengthen the developed ties and conveyed Kim Jong-un's brotherly regards. The visit came amid the international alarm over reported cooperation that includes North Korean munitions and personnel for Russia's war in Ukraine in exchange for military technology. On the same day, Chow met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. North Korean media said the sides reached agreements on all points during a strategic discussion on global issues. Neither side disclosed specifics, but both framed the talks as a step to broaden political and defense coordination. A UN inquiry says Russia's drone attacks on civilians near Ukraine's front line created a climate of terror, forcing thousands to flee. Act, it says, mounts to a crime against humanity of forcible transfer. In a 17-page report to be presented to the UN General Assembly, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine documents camera-equipped drones chasing civilians over long distances and striking them with firebombs and explosives, describing a coordinated policy to drive residents out. Investigators drew on 226 interviews and hundreds of verified videos focusing on 3 southern regions along the Dnipro over more than a year. The report notes steep population declines, with many elderly and disabled left behind. Russia and Ukraine accuse each other of targeting civilians. Both deny wrongdoing. Moscow has not acknowledged a policy of forcible transfer. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi underscores Egypt's leading role in regional stability and humanitarian solidarity, highlighting that Egypt hosts around 10 million people fleeing wars, including over 5 million Sudanese, while faith leaders praise Cairo's efforts to safeguard worship and advance Gaza ceasefire support. Receiving a World Council of Churches delegation in Cairo, President el-Sisi stressed Egypt's commitment to protecting freedom of worship and to drive de-escalation and aid access to Gaza. Delegates commended Egypt's pivotal diplomacy and its exceptional refugee response. The Egyptian leader said this national approach reflects Egypt's values and calls on international partners and religious institutions to back sustained assistance, reconstruction planning, and community support for refugees and host neighborhoods. U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi have signed a framework agreement to strengthen cooperation on critical minerals and rare earths. The deal aims to secure supplies of key resources vital for advanced manufacturing, energy, and defense industries. Both countries will coordinate investment and economic policies to develop diversified and transparent markets for critical minerals, reducing reliance on single supplies such as China. Trump is heading to South Korea today, where he is expected to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He said he hopes to reach a truce on the ongoing trade war between the world's 2 largest economies. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, but before we leave, let's wrap up with the headline-making stories. Gazans buried, 41 unidentified bodies returned by Israel as searches continue for thousands missing. Sudan's army chief says his forces withdrew from Al-Fasher after the RSF took control. And Egypt's President al-Sisi highlights Egypt's role in regional stability and support for millions fleeing conflicts. For more stories and live updates, follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok using the handle @QNewsEGY. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.